on for. And therefore, yes, the rational thing to do for him personally and for party and country is now to stand down. But I quite agree, he doesn't show signs of doing that. Therefore, there will be an ever intensifying push from all levels to push him out.
You withdrew your support from Boris Johnson about Sunak and Sajid Javid got the memo last night. Is it right now for us to read the last rites on Boris Johnson's time as Prime Minister, do you think? Is it over for him?
I think it is over, yes. Well, it's reading the last rites slowly, I think, unfortunately. For the party and the country, it still looks like a slow process because Boris still isn't accepting that this really is over. But it is. But people will ask really, well, then what has changed yesterday? And I think, well, what's different now since yesterday from a month ago? And people like you were saying, yeah, this is well now. What's different now is that whereas a month there were Conservative MPs just agonising and creating a vote of confidence in an uncoordinated way. It wasn't a plot; it was just a cry of anguish from dozens of members of Parliament separately. What's different now is the Conservative Party is going to turn its collective mind as to how to prize Boris Johnson out of 10 Downing Street, because I think probably that's now the majority of MPs. It's, as far as one can tell, the view of the majority of Conservative activists around the country. It is the view of senior ministers, some of the most talented ministers in the government who resigned yesterday. And so now this moves to, well, everybody discuss together how we're going to do this and bring this tragic situation to an end. So I think that's what's really changed in the last 24 hours.
Is there any part of him, do you think, that will just say, I should resign? Because in light of everything you've just said, it is absurd, William Hague, to cling on. Because what are you clinging to? You can't cling on against the wishes of the party that you lead. That's the very leader to do that, surely.
Yes, I mean, of course, political leaders do cling on, and in a way, one can always admire the tenacity of that. But it's normal to cling on if something is going to owns a secret policy that nobody knew about before, or they're really fighting over a principle on which they're not going to give in. This is not about any of these things. This is about a way of government conducted that much of the Conservative Party, most, I think, can't stomach anymore. That was shown again in the last few days over the matter of Chris Pincher. You know, and people like me have been writing, as loyal Times readers will recall, that for months I was writing, oh, this is how Boris could change. This is, this is how ethics and integrity takes, and this is how to get a grip on policy on Brexit and so on if he does X, Y, Z. Well, now I think, certainly I and many others have come to the conclusion he's not going to change. This is, we were hoping, but it's just never going to happen. So there isn't a change to cling on for. And therefore, yes, the rational thing to do for him personally and for party and country is now to stand down. But I quite agree, he doesn't show signs of doing that. Therefore, there will be an ever intensifying from all levels of the party to push him out.
Happen then? Do you think that the 1922 committee will quickly change its rules? Will Graham? I mean, days presumably someone would sit down with him and say, Prime Minister, it's over. You don't want to see it, you don't want to believe it, but it's over. I'm not letting you leave this room until you resign. Is there anyone in the party? Is there anyone he would listen to?
Well, of course, I mean, we're all doing it in many ways, aren't we? His Chancellor and Health Secretary, in effect, did that yesterday. You're right, that was in the old days, you know, the famous men in grey sort of gone round with the whiskey and the revolver, as it were. But that was before there were rules on the leadership. And now there are rules about the leadership election, and those were triggered a month ago, and they're not meant to be triggered for 12 months. Now, I've never been enthusiastic about changing the rules. You keep changing the rules according to the circumstances. What's the point in having the rules? But with a prime minister who defies all the normal rules and conventions of politics, probably they are justified in, if it's their view in the 1922 committee, in changing the rules pretty quickly, or threatening to change the rules, as they did when pushing Theresa May out of office. In this case, and they should get on with that quickly, because this is now a very damaging situation to the country and to the Conservative Party, and it needs resolving in the national interest as quickly as possible.
If he survives the next couple of weeks, it'll be summer recess, William. Is it possible that he's still Prime Minister in the autumn?
It is possible. It's really hard to get somebody out of 10 Downing Street if they're really determined to stay, and if they have just won a ballot under the rules, which they did a few weeks ago. So that is, of course, that is possible. Everything is possible, but at some point in the coming days, weeks, or months, this premiership is doomed, and I think there's no getting away from it. I don't think there's a recovery from that. I don't think once you reach the point where the Chancellor and the Health Secretary and the party chairman resign, there isn't a comeback of say, oh, now I've won all these people over again in a couple of months' time. It's actually only going to get worse, not better. And so it's better to recognize that now. But when that will happen, none of us know.
By of two of his most senior colleagues, the question dominated Westminster and filling the front pages this morning. Can the Prime Minister on to power? Glum faces at yesterday's cabinet in the hours before the resignations. Later today, Boris Johnson faces Prime Minister's questions and a grilling from MPs on the liaison committee. And while he moved quickly last night to fill his cabinet vacancies with the appointment of Nadhim Zahawi as his new Chancellor, a man himself tipped as a possible leadership rival, and Chief of Staff Steve Barclay as Health Secretary, it's clear the Prime Minister is battling to survive. The resignations came just as Boris Johnson was apologising for appointing Chris Pincher as Deputy Chief Whip, despite accusations of sexual harassment. Boris Johnson acknowledged he had been told about a previous complaint following days of denials from Number 10 that had been the case.
In hindsight, it was the wrong thing to do. I apologise to everybody who's been badly affected by it.
I'm just going to go and spend some time with my family. Thank you for coming.
Sajid Javid was the first to resign, making his position clear in a letter to the Prime Minister, saying the tone you set as leader and the values you represent reflect on your colleagues, your party, and ultimately the country. Minutes later, another body blow for the Prime Minister as Chancellor Rishi Sunak quit too. He said the public rightly expect government to be conducted properly, competently and seriously. I recognise this may be my last ministerial job, but I believe these stand fighting for, and that is why I'm resigning. Within the Conservative Party, anger and unease has reached new levels in the past few days.
We can't go on like this, and I think that's going to be a matter for all of my colleagues, those in government and those on the backbenches, about what steps we now need to take to deal with it.
Labour say Mr Johnson's time is up and are calling for an election now.
Changing one man at the top of the Tory party won't make any difference. It won't fix the problems. Let's have a fresh start for Britain. Let's have a real change of government.
Last month, Boris Johnson narrowly survived a vote of confidence in his leadership. Technically, he's immune from another such challenge for a year, but Tory rebels could try and use elections to the 1922 committee of Tory backbenchers to change the rules. Tamara Cohen, Sky News, Westminster.
that strikes me about this Chris Pincher business, 5 or 6 days, is it puts me very much in mind of Partygate. And I asked Ben about this a little bit yesterday, because it looks like, doesn't it, that Downing Street retrofits its explanations about various things to the public domain. What we find out, often through journalism. When Partygate first started, wasn't it the very end of November? I think the Daily Mirror first carried a story, and the Downing Street response was very much, oh, no, no, no. None of that happened. Nope, nope. And then when we watched that video, and we could all see it with our own eyes, then Boris Johnson was officially appalled. Just appalled. Now, he might have taken that moment to say, oh, by the way, there were all of these other gatherings, cakes, leaving do's, toasts, drink, things out the back garden. But no. He was went on in that video. And then day by day, week by week, more stories came out. And with each one, the explanations were retrofitted to whatever we had been told, whatever facts had leaked out about birthday parties, suitcases full of booze, two big gatherings the night before Prince Philip was buried. At every turn, when we learn something new, then Downing Street will come out with something for it. But at no stage does anyone come forward and say, do you know what, I'm going to come clean about this. Here's the whole picture. And so it is with Chris Pincher. We have some facts on Thursday night, and then into Friday and over the weekend, and each time something new comes out, actually, yes, now you mention it, yeah, that's right. And now I have Lord MacDonald and his excoriating letter today, and when that becomes into the public domain, again, the explanation is retrofitted, and we're told this time that it's forgetfulness on the part of Boris Johnson. Now, as Ben has been telling us, Conservative MPs, we know, have had the power to get rid of Boris Johnson if they want to, and they had the vote, and we've had all the machinations about will they change the rules for the leadership contest, will they stuff the 1922 committee with Boris haters, and when will the next vote be, and all of that, and who knows, maybe that will come to pass. But the truth is, I can name for you right now the people who, if they choose to, they're the only people in the country right now who have the power to get rid of Boris Johnson. It's a tiny handful of people, smaller even than the electorate of Conservative members of Parliament. Small group of individuals who can say now, I've had enough. Let me give you their names. And this is all taken from the gov.uk website. The Right Honourable Dominic Raab MP, the Right Honourable Rishi Sunak MP, the Right Honourable Elizabeth Truss MP, the Right Honourable Priti Patel MP, the Right Honourable Ben Wallace MP, Honourable Steve Barclay MP, the Right Honourable Michael Gove MP, the Right Honourable Sajid Javid MP, the Right Honourable Kwasi Kwarteng MP, the Right Honourable Alok Sharma MP, the Right Honourable Anne-Marie Trevelyan MP, the Right Honourable Therese Coffey, the Right Honourable Jotas MP, the Right Honourable Grant Shapps MP, the Right Honourable Brandon Lewis CBE MP, the Right Honourable Alistair Jack MP, the Right Honourable Simon Hart MP, the Right Honourable Baroness Evans of Bowes Park, the Right Honourable Nadine Reyes MP, the Right Honourable Mogg MP. Those are the names of the people who, if they choose to, can get rid of Boris Johnson. Now, it may be they take the position that they fully support Boris Johnson and fully support everything he's said and done. And that's a perfectly honourable position to take if that's what they want. But by all accounts, there are cabinet ministers talking privately to journalists about how sick they are of Boris Johnson and how bad they think he is for the country. And we're told that one of the reasons they don't stand up and say, I've had enough of this, is they're concerned about their own position. Should there be a leadership election, what will people think of them if they wielded the sword against Boris Johnson? So, they've been named, they know who they are, and they have the power to change things. They are the only people in the country right now, in our democracy, who can change things. Will they? Should they? 0345 6060 973. Will they put their private views in public? Or will they perhaps put self-interest first? Because something that's worth bearing in mind is some of those names I just read to you will, at some point in future, be standing for the leadership. And I think we're entitled to say to them, you stood by him all this time, was fine by you in public, and we're entitled to ask about their judgment on this.
Morning, everybody. Mass resignations, a late night, a prime ministerial, and the big question this morning on everyone's lips: can Boris Johnson survive? And if so, for how long? This morning, the Prime Minister preparing for PMQs and MPs at the Liaison Committee and showing no signs of going anywhere voluntarily. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, and the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, are the biggest resignations. Late last night, the Solicitor General, Alex Chalk, also quit, as did the party's Vice Chair, Bim Afolami. 2 trade envoys, Andrew Morrison and Theo Clark, and 4 parliamentary private secretaries, Jonathan Gullis, Saki Bhatti, Nicola Richard, and Virginia Crosby, have also quit. Nadeem Zahawi and Steve Barclay will be stepping up to take up their new posts as Chancellor and Health Secretary, respectively, while Michelle Donnellan will take over Nadeem Zahawi's former post as Education Secretary. A swathe of cabinets say they still support the PM, including the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, the Home Secretary Priti Patel, the Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries, and the Deputy PM Dominic Raab. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove, Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng, and the Work and Pensions Secretary, that's Therese Coffey, have also backed the Prime Minister. Here's the latest from tomorrow.
Weakened by the resignations of 2 of his most senior colleagues, the question dominating Westminster and filling the front pages this morning: can the Prime Minister cling on to power? Glum faces at yesterday's cabinet in the hours before the resignations. Later today, Boris Johnson faces Prime Minister's questions and a grilling from MPs on the Liaison Committee. And while he moved quickly last night to fill his cabinet vacancies with the appointment of Nadeem Zahawi as his new Chancellor, a man himself tipped as a possible leadership rival, and Chief of Staff Steve Barclay as Health Secretary, it's clear the Prime Minister is battling to survive. The resignations came just as Boris Johnson was apologising for appointing Chris Pincher as Deputy Chief Whip, despite accusations of sexual harassment. Boris Johnson acknowledged he had been told about a previous complaint following days of denials from Number 10 that had been the case.
In hindsight, it was the wrong thing to do. I apologise to everybody who's been badly affected by it.
I'm just going to go spend some time with my family. Thank you for coming.
Sajid Javid was the first to resign, making his position clear in a letter to the Prime Minister, saying the tone you set as leader and the values you represent reflect on your colleagues, your party, and ultimately the country. Minutes later, another body blow for the Prime Minister as Chancellor Rishi Sunak quit too. He said the public rightly expect government to be conducted properly, competently and seriously, I recognise this may be my last ministerial job, but I believe these standards are worth fighting for, and that is why I'm resigning. Within the Conservative Party, anger and unease has reached new levels in the past few days.
We can't go on like this, and I think that's going to be a matter for all of my colleagues, those in government and those on the backbenches, about what steps we now need to take to deal with it.
Labour say Mr Johnson's time is up and are calling for an election now.
Changing one man at the top of the Tory party won't make any difference. It won't fix the problems. Let's have a fresh start for Britain. Let's have a real change of government.
Last month, Boris Johnson narrowly survived a vote of confidence in his leadership. Technically, he's immune from another such challenge for a year, but Tory rebels could try and use elections to the 1922 committee of Tory backbenchers to change the rules. Tamara Cohen, Sky News, Westminster.
The Chancellor, Nadine Zahawi, is with us this morning. Congratulations, Chancellor. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. What first attracted you to become Chancellor for a man described as a liar, a schemer, a lawbreaker, and without integrity?
You don't go into this job to have an easy life. You make some tough decisions every day, and sometimes it's easy to walk away, but actually it's much tougher to deliver for the country. If you look at where we are today, Kay, we are facing a global battle against inflation. Inflation is raging in Germany and the US. And no, but it's important. You're asking me a question about why I'm doing this job. I'm doing it because I think the team that is in government today is the team that will deliver today a tax cut for 30 million people, £330 today, as we've moved the threshold of national insurance up to £12,500, forgive me. And of course, the work I was doing in education, on skills, those runways for people's careers to take off on. We have a tight labour market, we know that.
Yeah.
So there's some big challenges facing us.
And I do want
and I want to make sure we deal with those challenges.
Okay.
The people, by the way, who are egging us on to divide and to turn on one another are people like Alistair Campbell. And wherever Alistair Campbell is, you want to be on the opposite side of the argument, in my view.
Okay. Sometimes, you said sometimes it's easier to walk away. Did you think about it?
No, I'm just saying to you, in life, that it's having to take tough decisions, as you do when I was in vaccines, when I'm in education, and now in the Treasury. There are no easy answers. The most important thing to remember is we've got a task ahead of us to rebuild the economy. We've just come out from what is the equivalent of a world war.
I want to talk about the economy. Let's do broad brush to start
and of course
with.
grow the economy.
Did you threaten to resign?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't threaten to resign at all.
Where did that story come from, I wonder?
I have.
Apparently, Liz Truss was going to be Foreign Secretary. The Foreign Secretary was going to be Chancellor, and you said, "If it's not me, I'm stepping."
No, I haven't. That is
completely
not true.
untrue.
And by the way,
no foundation in reality.
Absolutely. By the way, this is a team game, and you play for the team and you deliver for the nation.
Okay.
Ultimately,
so nothing to do with personal ambition.
Our focus has to be about delivery, Kate. That is the important.
Nothing to do with personal ambition.
No, because as I said to you, sometimes walking away may give you some respite, dare I say. But the idea that you have to deliver for the country, I think, is the country that's given me everything, given my family everything, is the right thing to do. We have some big challenges ahead of us. We've got war raging on our continent. Nobody foresaw a war in Europe for decades. Now,
will you run as leader when there's a vacancy? Will you run as leader when there's a vacancy?
There's no vacancy. The people who are egging us on to turn on one another are the people like Alistair Campbell who will never vote Conservative.
I'm not talking about Alistair Campbell.
No, but what I'm saying to you is,
talking about the government. When there's a vacancy, will you run? The odds are really good for you at the moment, 10 to 1.
Well, first of all, I will be working very hard to make sure that this team continues to deliver. The Prime Minister is focused on delivery. I want to make sure that not only do we rebuild the economy, we've got to grow the economy. We had some good growth, the second fastest growing country this year. It returns to that in 2024. It grows again in 2025. But I've got to make sure we get through 22 and 23, where we've got inflation, which can be a really painful thing if we let it gets out of control.
Okay, let's
and
talk
that is
about,
my focus. It has to be my focus.
Let's talk about policy then.
Of
What
course.
immediate plans did you make with the Prime Minister yesterday when it comes to national insurance, when it comes to cutting taxes, when it comes to tackling inflation, when it comes to corporation tax? What conversations did you have during your longer meeting yesterday?
So it's my first day in the job. The conversation we had is my task is to rebuild the economy and to grow the economy. I will look at everything to make sure that we continue to be on the side of people. A tax cut today of £330, the first tax cut in a decade for 30 million people. That's really important. £1,200 for 8 million people who are really being squeezed by this global battle against inflation. That's really important. Once I've looked at the evidence, I'll be very happy to be back on your show, Kay, and share with you what I think we need to do to rebuild and grow. No, I've got to rebuild and grow the economy. We've just come out of the equivalent of a world war, and we've got war raging in Europe because of Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. We've got to deal with these big things now. I think to indulge in infighting is the wrong thing to do. We've got to unite and deliver.
Well, you wanted to move on to the economy, so we are. We've predicted to have the slowest economy growth in the G7 next year and the highest inflation. Our economic outlook is just not very good, is it?
Well, I just said, so we had the second fastest growth this year, and we're set to return to that in 2024. The gap is 2023. I want to look at what more I can do to make sure we can return to growth. The important thing is to get inflation under control, be fiscally responsible. Well, I'll come back on your programme and very happily talk to you about exactly how I'm going to make sure we do that. The first thing we've got to do is make sure that we are really careful about whether it's public sector pay, so that inflation doesn't continue to be fueled. That fire mustn't be fueled. That will cause even deeper and more painful problems for exactly the people we're trying to help. With the tax cut today, those 30 million people who are getting £330 of a tax cut today will suffer the most if inflation's out of control.
What are you going to do about corporation tax?
I will look at everything. There's nothing off the table. I want to be one of the most competitive countries in the world for investment. I know that boards around the world, when they make investment decisions, they're long-term, and the one tax they can compare globally is corporation tax. And I want to make sure that we are as competitive as we can be whilst maintaining fiscal discipline, of course, working with the Bank of England to make sure that monetary policy is right for this country, and bringing inflation under control. It will abate. My task is to make sure it happens as quickly as possible, and to be on the side of the people who are really hard pressed, which is why today's tax cut.
Like teachers who wanted a 9% pay rise. Well, they wanted more. You said that you would offer them a 9% pay rise. Now that you're in a position to do that, will you still honour that?
So the pledge I will give teachers is we will do 9% for the teachers that are starting in teaching this year, 7.7% next year for them.
So what about other public sector workers? Will they get the same?
And senior teachers will get that 5% that I've proposed. And I will obviously look at the recommendation from the pay review bodies across the board, where we're looking.
Teachers 9%, and then new nurses, you're saying, you can only get 3%.
No, but what I've said to new teachers is I want to get them to £30,000 a year. The public sector review bodies for health, for education, for transport, and elsewhere will make recommendations, and I will look at those very, very carefully.
You're not going to be even-handed across the board.
No, you've got to look at the public sector review bodies and then make sure you follow the evidence, and I will obviously working with my colleagues across government, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay. No, what I'm saying to you is the public sector review bodies, each Secretary of State has made their submission to those review bodies. They will come back to us. We will look at it very carefully, and we'll make an announcement in due course.
What are you going to do about the energy price cap in October?
So again, we have got an energy price cap, which actually does help people. What will happen in October is additional help, that grant that Rishi Sunak delivered so brilliantly, that will help people with the cost of energy. But of course, we'll look at where energy prices are then. There is a spike in energy, you know that, because of the illegal occupation of Ukraine. And we've got to make sure we have energy strategy, with the Prime Minister delivered, by the way, with Kwasi Kwarteng, that allows us to invest in nuclear. Very, very important investment, which Labour decided to divest from.
What are you going to do about fuel duty?
I will look at everything. I'm not going to make policy
I'm
on
not
the
going to play
healthcare.
gotcha questions. I'm not
I
going to
know.
ask you how much a
I'm just
litre
saying
of
to-
petrol is, but I do want to know what you're going to do about fuel duty.
It's my first day in the job, and I will look at
I know,
everything.
but
I'll be
you must have done-
delighted to
you
come
must-
back and see
You must have done the interview process last night when you went in and said, "Give me the job as Chancellor." So you must have had some of the answers to some of these questions.
Well, you know my track record, I hope, in government, whether delivering the vaccine or in education and now in the Treasury, is I will look at the evidence and I will share the evidence with the nation, and I will address exactly what we will do. The most important thing is to rebuild the economy post-pandemic and to get growth going again. And tax cuts. We're delivering the first tax cut in a decade today. I'm determined to do more.
Boris Johnson told 80 loyal MPs yesterday that it would now be easier to deliver tax cuts because Rishi Sunak is not there anymore. So was Rishi Sunak a bad Chancellor?
Not at all. You, I'm sure, read Boris Johnson's letter to Rishi Sunak and, of course, to
I read Rishi Sunak's letter to him as well.
To Sajid Javid, and Rishi did an excellent job as Chancellor. He's delivered £37 billion of help for those people who need that help because of the global battle against inflation. In
You can't tell me what more is.
Right. I'm going to, I hope, refine fiscal discipline, bring inflation under control.
How are you
A
going to
tax
do that?
cut today, the first tax cut in a decade.
How are you going to do it?
So it's my first day in the job. I'm going to look at everything, every lever that's available to me to make sure we get this. Ultimately, we are on the side of people who are, at the moment, struggling with their weekly shops, struggling with paying those energy bills. That's why getting this tax cut today to 30 million people, £330, is so important.
And you have told me that 3 times now. Whatever you
And I'll
do
keep repeating it.
Yeah, OK. I've asked you some of the other stuff that you can't answer, but you have promised to come back. So let's see. Whatever you do about taxes, though, and whatever you do about the cost of living, it doesn't erase the shame of this Prime Minister defending sexual harassment at work, does it?
So the Prime Minister gave an interview last night where he spoke about the mistake that, the benefit of hindsight, he should have never appointed Chris Pincher to Deputy Chief Whip. I think this government is determined to make sure that no one abuses their position or power, and anybody who has a complaint should come forward and make that complaint. The allegations against Chris Pincher were investigated in 2017, were found not to be right. He was appointed by Theresa May as a minister, continued in ministerial office. The allegations in the Foreign Office were investigated and resolved at the time with an apology from Chris Pincher. But with the benefit of hindsight, the Prime Minister is right.
It's a sex pest.
He is right. The Prime Minister was right to apologise and say that with the benefit of hindsight, it was the wrong appointment.
You joked about
we
it.
make decisions.
You said Pincher by name, Pincher by nature.
Kate.
And you want to serve as this man's Chancellor?
Okay, we make decisions at warp speed in government. There are no easy decisions to make. We don't get all those decisions right. It's right for the Prime Minister to come forward and apologise.
Yeah, but if somebody comes to you and says, this bloke, you want to watch out for him, for what he's been up to, if somebody actually was face to face with the Prime Minister, and he did nothing about it, and then he lied about it.
Well, first of all, we make decisions, you know that. The speed at which we make decisions in government, especially dealing with a pandemic, dealing with a global battle against inflation, war on our continent, we don't get every decision right. The Prime Minister was right to come out and say, look, with the benefit of hindsight, I'm sorry, I made a mistake on appointing Chris Pincher. That's the right thing to do. There's also due process. It's only right that we protect people from any form of abuse or any form of abuse of power by anyone. And actually, anyone watching this programme should know that if they work in government, for any MP or any minister, they can come forward and if they feel that in any way been abused, that's the right thing to do.
Okay,
that culture is the right culture. Okay. To apologise is the right thing to do.
Okay. We are
Nothing is ever easy.
Sajid Javid and also Rishi Sunak both questioned the integrity of this Prime Minister. Do you think this Prime Minister has integrity?
I do. I think he...
So we need to know.
Well, because he's determined to deliver for this country.
Good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed, Chancellor. Thank you. Let's have a look at the odds, should we? And 4-1 actually for Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, 9-1, and as I said, 10-1 for the new Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi. Looking at the papers for you. Let's start with the Telegraph, should we? Boris Johnson's premiership is hanging on by a thread after the Health Secretary and the Chancellor resigned in quick succession yesterday. The Guardian says the PM is on the brink of losing Javid and Sunak. So too does The Times. The Mirror exclaims, finally, and calls the Prime Minister toxic on its front page. But the Daily Mail asks whether Boris, the greased piglet, can wriggle out of this. And the Metro says Boris Johnson is still clinging on to power despite those heavy blows. The Express takes a different tone, urging Mr Johnson to fight on and cut taxes. At midday, Boris Johnson takes to the dispatch box for what's expected to be a very lively Prime Minister's questions. And later in the day, the PM will appear before the liaison committee as he fights to stay in his job. Still to come on the programme for you, going to be speaking to the former Conservative MP and ex-Attorney General, that's Dominic Grieve. Discuss the chaotic events at Westminster with the Spectator's Deputy Political Editor, Katie Bowles, and former Conservative advisor, Claire Purcell. And we'll hear from the Conservative MP, Sir Roger Gale, as he joins calls for the Prime Minister to go. Before all that, though, let's bring in Will Walden, who used to be the former press secretary to Boris Johnson. Hi, Will. Good to see you this morning. Talk me through your
Morning,
thoughts.
Kate. Oh, what a mess. I mean, what a total mess. I didn't hear all of Nadeem Zahawi. He's a good man with a tough job, and I'm sure he was sort of manfully defending the Prime Minister. But the truth is, we're sitting here this morning, and once again, the Prime Minister has been front and centre of his own defenestration. Nadeem Zahawi talked there about, you know, how he'd come out and, you know, he'd cleared up the record. The problem is that the record should have been cleared up on Friday. When they realised they were busted over Pincher, they should have been honest about it. And whatever happened, the Prime Minister's spokespeople over the weekend told a very different story, and then someone busted that, and he was caught again with his hand in the cookie jar. And I think one thing's clear: if the Tories didn't know that Boris Johnson wasn't going to change, and I think over the years, Kay, I've told you that he absolutely won't, then this morning for sure they know he won't. What they have is what they've got. I think that the problem for the Prime Minister is that it seems now the majority are, you know, dancing to a different tune and moving in a different direction to him.
He's survived again, though, hasn't he?
Well, he has for now, you know, and in no small part in terms of acting quickly. But what does that survival cost? You know, Nadeem Zahawi, you know, the new Chancellor, you know, it sounds like from some of the reports this morning, I don't know if you asked him about it, you know, has fought a battle to become Chancellor, and therefore, you know, he's won that battle. Boris is apparently promising that tax cuts are the answer. I would just say to you, Kay, can you run economic policy in this country on the basis simply of trying to stay in power? It feels like a PM being led rather than a PM leading, and that's the problem that he's got. And I think that the tone of the resignations yesterday was visceral. I think that view in part appears to, in my mind, to be shared by at least some other cabinet ministers. But the truth is now that I think that the whole handling of the Pincher affair, you know, has demonstrated to people Boris won't change it, just like Partygate. There weren't any parties. Oh, yes, there were. I've now been caught. It's exactly the same with Pincher. And I think that they're looking at the polling, you know, now nearly 70% think he should go, and thinking that the game is probably up. And I think that if there aren't further resignations and that isn't enough, then what we will see is rather than the 1922 committee changing the rules in 6 months, change them at a later date, I think they'll move to the Prime Minister. One thing to add, Kay, you know, Boris is not a quitter. I remember that we've been in the car about 5 minutes in 2016 because he can't anymore because Michael Gove had stabbed him in the front and stabbed him in the back. And within 5 minutes of leaving that press conference, he looked at me and he said, do you know what? I think I've made the wrong decision here. And I think that's Boris all over. He will dig in. He will continue to fight, whatever the odds. And the Conservative Party now is in open warfare. They know that in order to get rid of him, they will have to continue to move against him, and it will not be pretty in the coming days and weeks.
an almighty political fire.
Prime Minister, have you got a comment about the Chancellor's resignation?
Just hours earlier in Cabinet, the man on the right, Chancellor Rishi Sunak, played along for the cameras. By dinner time, he'd quit, along with Health Secretary Sajid Javid.
Good evening. I'm just going to go spend some time with my family. Thank you for coming.
Both men said they were concerned by the standards Boris Johnson's been setting. While illegal parties at number 10 have been a major source of discontent, the latest scandal is centred on this man, Chris Pincher. He's stood down as Deputy Tory Whip over allegations he groped two men in a private club. But it's since emerged Boris Johnson appointed him despite knowing of other sexual misconduct claims dating back several years.
What I wanted was to give Chris Pincher, if not the benefit of that, then the ability to prove that he could do better. That was the wrong decision, and I bitterly regret it.
Boris Johnson's 2019 election win smashed Labor's hold over its traditional territory. Many of the Prime Minister's colleagues believe he has an X factor with voters, and his loyal supporters say they're not spooked by cabinet resignations, no matter how senior.
The Prime Minister, with a mandate from the British people and a majority in the House of Commons, is the one who appoints cabinet ministers, not somebody who is brought down by cabinet ministers.
Boris Johnson survived a confidence vote just last month, and under current party rules, he'll be spared another one for about a year. But some MPs are hatching a plan to change the rules so they can change the leader.
This government is collapsing, the Tory party is corrupted, and changing one man at the top of the Tory party won't make any difference.
Nobody's put up their hand to challenge him yet, but this once popular Prime Minister looks to be on borrowed time. Nick Dole, ABC News, London.